I heard someone mention before the season how, offensive coordinators don't call plays just from a play per play perspective. They call it as more of a series or more of as a drive perspective. They may actually call a throwaway play just to set up the next play, right?
Welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host, and on this episode, I'm thrilled to have Clevta on the show. He is a quantitative NFL bettor. Among other topics in this episode, we talk about the metrics that he uses and his process for making NFL bets. He gives us a Week 6 NFL bet that he likes, and we also talk about the Denver Broncos and Russell Wilson. The Football Analytics Show is supported by listeners like you. More about that at the end of the episode. The Football Analytics Show is also brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting Newsletter. This is a free service that strives to be three things. 1, valuable. 2, concise. 3, entertaining. In this newsletter, I write about college football and NFL bets that I have made, and I also send out a curated list of sports betting tips and news every Saturday morning. If you sign up, I'll send you my top 5 sports betting podcasts, an education through your ears. To sign up for this free service, go to thepowerrank.com. That is my site for better sports betting information. Once again, that's thepowerrank.com. Joining me on this episode of the Football Analytics Show is Clevta. He is a quantitative NFL analyst and bettor. TA, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ed, appreciate you having me.
TA, I'm so interested in your story. How did you get into NFL, both in terms of analytics, betting, kind of which one happened first? Tell us your story.
Yeah, so just full disclosure, I'm not a full-time sports bettor. I treat the NFL like it's a full-time job, but in reality, my full-time kind of career is in finance. I've been in finance in the investment space for over 20 years. Got my MBA back. Wow, it seems like yesterday, but it's almost 20 years ago. So I've got that kind of finance background, and I married that kind of diligence on the investment side of things and modeling and evaluating companies and those sorts of things, and marry that with my love of sports and the NFL in particular. So as far as I can remember, I think my first memory as a child, I was 4 years old, and it was me at my parents' house. They had a bunch of friends over watching the Browns lose on a Hail Mary to Ahmad Rashad and the Vikings. I think I was 4 years old at the time. And
wow.
The first of many heartbreaks as a Cleveland sports fan started then. But that was my first memory. I mean, it was a football game. And,
wow.
That moved on to, when I was 7, 8, 9 years old, I was taking Sports Illustrated draft rankings from Dr. Z and doing my own mock drafts. Like, that's how addicted I was as a kid. I blame my older brother, who was a football player in high school and growing up. So I definitely got that from him. But just, I've had this passion for the NFL and for all sports growing up, and didn't make my first football wager, I think, until I was a senior in college.
Okay.
I had a roommate who had a local bookie, and said, "Oh, I know the NFL. Like, I know football. This probably is going to be easy." And I'm sure you've heard this tale many a time, but lost my butt pretty quickly and often for a number of years, and didn't really understand how everything worked out, and how the markets work, and how to evaluate teams. And it was just more from a fan perspective. And so that's how I started, and it's kind of all evolved. I've kind of learned as we've gone along to how to properly evaluate teams and the markets and those sorts of things, and I've gotten better at it. And again, marrying the finance side of things has really helped me. And so it's evolved into probably the last 10, 12 years. I consider myself a winning NFL bettor, and participated in either the Westgate Super Contest or the Circa Millions contest every year, and have finished top 100 multiple times. I've hitting about 56% in the last 10 years in those pools. So, I think all in all, I've done, as well as, I could hope, considering the beginnings of my my bet life. And I think that from the analytics side, that's really, that evolution has really helped me become a better bettor. I think just, we've gone from looking at generic like points per game to yards per play to now we're all the great NFL fast data that's out there, the play-by-play data. You can get all the EPA numbers and the success rates and all those sorts of things has really evolved. And so, me mirroring all that, that background that I have with the numbers has helped me in my evolution as a bettor and just analyzing the NFL.
Awesome. We'll get into all of that in a sec. But I want to ask you a little bit more about your finance background. I don't know really much about it. So can you give us an example of, maybe a tool that you've taken from that background and applied to the NFL?
Yeah, so I've got experience mainly in the investment side of things, both public and private markets. And I think the best crossover that I can come up with is just evaluating. I used to be a public stock analyst when my career first started, and just evaluating the stock market, the psychology of the market. The market will overreact at times to maybe earnings calls from a company, and just having the ability to kind of wipe out some of that near-term biases and evaluate where the company stands right now in relation to the valuation of the company, and seeing if it's kind of gone too far. And that's how I think I've done a decent job of looking at the NFL the same way. Teams, a team just gets blown out, and I don't sit there and change my power ratings. I actually don't have power ratings. You can get into that, but I don't use power ratings. I don't believe in them. But I don't change my opinion necessarily on one game, absent of injuries, et cetera. So I think looking at companies and evaluating just how the markets react to companies, both in kind of the public markets, for example, and the betting market, I think can definitely be related in the two ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like understanding the markets is really important in the NFL, and I don't know if you would agree with this, but I feel like in the NFL, that's the market that tends to most overreact to stuff, possibly because it's the most public market. And, we know it's a league with a salary cap and strong regression to the mean, but yet you still see huge favorites. We'll pick on one example. I think the Colts were a 14-point favorite at the Jags last game of last season. So I would presume that your background in finance kind of helps you identify things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually, and it's funny, I tweeted about it. If you look historically, I do my best in the first 3-4 weeks of the season, especially week 2 and week 3. And that's where you see by far the biggest overreactions in the NFL. It happens every single year. Whatever our perceptions are coming into the season, something happens in the first week, team gets blown out, team looks better than they thought, or vice versa. And just the markets completely overreact. And it happens, it's like clockwork. And it's incredible that in general, we don't fully grasp that and learn from history, and we don't overreact in that way. But it just happens all the time. I remember last year, the Titans coming into the season were expected to be a playoff team. They got a bunch of players got COVID. I think Mike Vrabel got COVID and before the season, and they got blown out by the Cardinals in that opener. They looked horrible. And just everybody sold the Titans immediately. And they went into Seattle the next week. And I remember, we could talk about my process, but I always go and do my best guess at the lines before they come out and compare it to what the actual lines are. And I think I had that as like a 3.5. I thought Seattle was maybe 3.5 points, 4 points better than Tennessee. And that was mainly based on my preseason expectations. It had nothing to do with what happened in week 1. And the line came out 6.5, and I was just floored, and I couldn't believe it. And that was my first bet. That was my largest bet early in the season. It was right away. I was on it, and actually the market moved with me for a little bit and then moved back, and I think it closed at 6.5. And the Titans ended up winning in overtime in that game. And it was just a perfect example of why did all of our beliefs change because of one game. It's such a small sample size. We've seen it. I mean, great teams get blown out all the time. Like, why is it because it happened in the first game? We all of a sudden just totally ignore our preseason beliefs. So that definitely happens all the time, where we get these overreactions. I think, I'm not a trends bettor per se. I mean, I think I pay attention to them if they make sense, if you could tell a real story around them. And one of my favorite trends, it's been long successful, is backing teams off of a shutout loss in the NFL. If they're an underdog the next week and it's a non-division game, so there's a couple of filters there, but essentially the other team may not be as motivated. They may look ahead. They see that their opponent just got shut out. They don't take them as seriously. The team that got shut out is very motivated. All those sorts of things, and it happens time and time again where that team covers at like a 70% rate. And it's been like this since the 90s, and so that's a perfect example. Like you get these. The Colts were in this spot a couple of weeks ago. They beat the Chiefs outright. Now, it might have been ugly, but they did it. And that line went from it was 3. I think Kansas City was -3 in the look ahead, and it opened 6.5. I actually grabbed it at 7. It ticked to 7, and I grabbed the Colts immediately. And so that was a perfect example of, that's a complete overreaction based on the early season and based on that shutout. And so it happens all the time. The markets do this, and I'm more than willing to sit back and pick those off as much as I can. And as long as it's not a multi-week trend where the team just looks horrible, comparatively versus what we thought coming into the season. If it's just a 1-week thing, I'm more than willing to fade that narrative.
Yeah, well, we'll get into some of these multi-week situations later with the Denver Broncos. But before we do that, I've noticed over the last couple of years you post on Twitter very intelligent stuff about success rate and similar things that I look at. You also have a site, cleveanalytics.com. How long have you been doing the site and the write-ups there?
So I started literally right before last football season. It was maybe like 3 or 4 days before. I had never wanted to, again, I've got a full-time job and have a wife and a daughter and don't have that much time on my hands. But I was approached by many people hey, we love your stuff. We would love for you really should create a site and expand on your thoughts and, dissect some of these matchups and post, some of your opinions and data points on your own site. Like we would subscribe to that. We think it's great information. And I don't believe, I'm not a tout in quotes, and I don't believe in, necessarily selling picks. It's just my personal thing. And so I said, well, I don't want to do it that way. What's that?
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I don't you're never going to see game of the month or game of the year or, buy this pick. It's a guaranteed winner. Like none of that BS.
Lock of the season, man. That's the terminology. We gotta call them locks.
Oh yeah. Sorry. Locks of the century. So at no point would I ever want to do that. So I said, look, I'll do it if I can do it my way. And I'm going to give my opinion on every game. I'm going to break down, matchups that at least I feel more passionately about, or if I have more data on. And I will, dissect it as much as I can. I'll post all the stats, that maybe the average person out there doesn't have access to, or doesn't know where to get it, and summarize it in a clean way. I will, I don't really enjoy it, but I think it's necessary, breaking down injury reports. So that's something that I think is a little bit of an inefficiency in the market. It's not very easy to model, is the impact of injuries, especially kind of non-sexy injuries, or offensive linemen, pass rushers, secondary, those cluster injuries. Like I don't think anyone's really solved how to properly value that, and I surely have it, but at least I can break that down for people and say, look, here are the injuries that you probably don't even know about at the left guard position and in the center position of this team. Here are their backups. Here's why it could be impactful or it may not be impactful. So I do all of that for each game. And then I also provide analysis on, DFS. Anyone who's interested in fantasy football or DFS, I have a survivor grid. So if you participate in survivor pools, I have win probabilities of every team for every game, expected value for each team for that week, future value. I do an ATS pick'em pool where I pick every game against the spread. If you're in a pool and you just need help, I pick them all. I'm hitting 60% this year for whatever it's worth, picking every game. But I do all of that because, in my opinion, the average person isn't just a bettor. They don't just play fantasy football. They dabble in all these different pools and contests. And so I try to create this as like a one-stop shop where I can give information for anyone who's interested in this. And so that's really how I've set it up. And I also do post my picks because I want to be transparent and say, look, when I bet a game, I send it out. I say, here's what I'm on. Here's what I'm taking. I would only take it at this number. I wouldn't take it at this number. I wouldn't pay, this much juice because I want to be fully transparent. And I make it a point to say, if you're only here to buy picks, don't subscribe to the site. That's not what this is for. I want you to gain knowledge and to, be able to, maybe improve your betting process and your ability to break down these games. And so that's hopefully what I've been doing, and I've gotten a lot of good feedback on it. And so that's a long-winded answer, but that's essentially what my site is about. And, it's been successful and people are happy with it. So hopefully we continue it on and trying to add more people and maybe add more, deeper analysis, for the general public as we move along. And that's really the goal.
That's awesome. So so you weren't writing every game up before the start of last season? So not 2020?
So full disclosure, I did work with Warren Sharp. Well, obviously a lot of people know out there, worked for his site for a couple of years. It's me and Warren, Warren kind of started like me, had a small following and had a full-time job and was doing this on the side, and it was a successful bettor, especially in totals in the NFL. And he had a small blog, and we had gone back and forth on Twitter a handful of times. And a couple of years ago, before he even started his site, I said, hey, would love to get together. Let's do something together. And he said, well, that's interesting. You sent me a message. I'm starting my own site. I'm working with this NFL team as a consultant. I'd love to get some help. So I joined on and really worked with him for one NFL team. We were consulted for a season, or actually 2 seasons. And so we were evaluating that team's opponents on the defensive side of things every week. And so I would help him write reports, break down some of the opponent trends and personnel groupings and all those sorts of things. And that was a really great experience. And that was really my goal all along, was try to work for an NFL team. So I thought that was one way to kind of break in. And so along the way, he had a public site that he also started with some stats, and he's got his betting pages and stuff. And so I didn't really do as much on that side. I wrote some articles and some, would break down maybe one game a week that I liked and did kind of the matchup analysis. And so that's how it started. And then when I left Warren's site before last season, the consulting with the team, they ended up, not renewing. And so I said, well, look, it's, time for me to kind of do my own thing. That was the only reason why I really wanted to work with him in the first place. And so I left and started my own thing. So I took some of that, the weekly write-ups where I would do one game, 1 or 2 games for his site. And now I wanted to do it for all the games on my site. So that's kind of how it's evolved. And it's actually made me a better bettor, because there are times where I don't have an opinion on a game, but I'm kind of I'm forcing myself to write it up and look at the matchups, and something will pop and it's like, oh man, I didn't even realize that. And I'll dig in a little deeper, and it ends up turning into a pick of mine, that, a wager of mine that maybe normally I wouldn't have found. So it has helped me become, I think, a better bettor.
That's awesome. How do you find time to do all this? You sent me a sample of your write-ups, and they're very complete. They're very long, and that was a single game. So how do you find time every fall?
It's difficult. I have a great wife who's supportive. It's gotten harder as, like I said, we've got a 2.5-year-old now. And so, I've had the luxury of working remotely for my firm for a number of years, even before COVID. And just the way it works with my firm, it's kind of a lumpy kind of workload. So there are times where I have just no time at all, and there's other weeks where I have lots of time, just the way it is in this field. And so, I have to balance that. And, I have, I allocate very specific pieces of the week to, different parts of the site and my analysis. And I did make one hire before the season. He's been a great guy. This guy named Chase, who's a data scientist out of New York, and young guy in his 20s trying to learn he doesn't know much about the betting space, but he's really good with numbers and with data. And I needed help, just a handful of hours a week, just helping me, with the site, helping me kind of gather data. He's really good at, essentially writing scripts. It's not something I do. Writing scripts and able to access data very quickly, much faster than I can do, which is taking up way too much of my time last year. So that's really helped on the front end a lot. So just getting the data, he's been helping me with that, and so that's helped me from a time perspective. But yeah, it's difficult. Like I have to silo different parts of the week for work, regular work, for family life, and for this website. I'll say that the write-up I sent to you is one because I wagered on the Saints. So the ones that I have an actual wager on are in depth like that. The ones that I don't have a wager on, that maybe it's just, I think the market is priced right, I just give like a handful of bullets as to why, and maybe one or two matchups that could be exploited. But it's not as detailed, but it's definitely enough where you get something out of it. And I go through injury reports with all the write-ups, no matter what. But that's essentially how I do it. And it's not easy. And last year I got worn down a little bit, but I really enjoy this, and it's been successful. So if I was losing and I was incorrect on a lot of my calls and a lot of my analysis, it would probably be a much more difficult task. But the fact that I'm doing well and followers are doing well, that's made it a lot easier.
Excellent. So TA, maybe give us a sense for the type of metrics you look at, and then your process for making NFL bets.
Yeah, so I mentioned, a lot of the same things you'll hear from probably some of your other guests, with the success rates and the EPA, like that's stuff that I've incorporated a lot. I think I'm using more, a lot of people use play-by-play level data. I'm starting to evolve a little bit more on drive and series level data. And that is an evolution that I started before the season, and it makes I'm still not positive, how good I am with it yet, but I think it makes more sense. I always try to listen to other people, smart people talk, and I heard someone mention before the season how offensive coordinators don't call plays just from a play per play perspective. They call it as more of a series or more of as a drive perspective. They may actually call a throwaway play just to set up the next play, right? And so
yeah, for sure.
It's better to look at some of these metrics more as a drive, as a whole, in terms of a drive, than it is on a per play basis. And so I think that makes some sense. I also think you might have a team that just has a lot of 3 and outs, just can't string together multiple first downs, but will hit a couple big plays, and that's how they score a lot of their points. And that really isn't sticky from week to week and isn't as predictive. And so I'd rather back the offense that is more consistently able to string together long drives, and then, conversely, the defenses that are able to, stop teams from marching down the field. And so I'm starting to evolve more from a drive analysis perspective. But from, going back to the EPA and the success rates, but mainly EPA, I think the one area that people have struggled with, and I do my best to create these or find these inefficiencies, is I don't think anyone really knows how some of these EPA numbers are produced, right? They just say, oh, this team is 5th in EPA and offense, and just kind of go with that number, and that drives their analysis. But like, what goes into that EPA number? That's what I want to know, and that's what I dig into as much as I can. Is some of that stuff fluky? Is it all created on big plays? Defensively, is a defense getting dinged because they're not creating turnovers? Is it, an offense? Are you, if you throw a pick six, or maybe if you have a couple fluky fumbles, especially early in the season where there's limited sample size, is that completely, inflating or deflating your EPA numbers? I don't think people spend enough time digging into that. And so that's what I try to do. And I think I find my best kind of inefficiencies that way. I try to find teams that might be undervalued or overvalued based on essentially how did they get those numbers, right? And is that predictive or not predictive the next week? So that is something that I continue to try and do my best. It's hard. It's trying to find a needle in a haystack sometimes.
So yeah, you mentioned how EPA, you have to dig a little bit deeper, and obviously turnovers affect EPA a lot, big plays and stuff that is not, big plays, randomness plays a big element in those types of things. So I presume, with the success rate kind of filters that out, right? You don't have like massive negative EPA for like a pick six or whatnot. So I presume that you found that with success rate, it tends to be, it in some sense does a little bit of that filtering for you.
It does. But I still think that it's such. I think it's because when it's early in the season, it's such a massive. I still think EPA is important because in those high leverage situations, if you're able to create, on a 3rd and 1, if you're the Saints and you're using Taysom Hill and he's consistently getting not just 2 yards to be successful, but he's getting 10 plus yards, that's important. So that. Yes, the success rate would filter some of that out, but doesn't get all of it. It's a marriage between the two. I'll just say that. And so I'm using the Saints as an example here because I've actually backed them, and I sent you the write up. I had this is before the game. I had the Saints -5.5 against Seattle, and they covered that. It was a tough outcome, but they did cover it. And I thought that the Saints were vastly underrated and undervalued. I actually had them against the Vikings 2 weeks ago as well in London, and they covered that game too. And little things like their offensive rush EPA was like 22nd, and it wasn't really impressive. And then when you dug further, their success rates were a lot better. If you excluded turnovers from the EPA number, their success rate running the football was 6th best. And so it was just because there was a terrible, a fluky fumble by Alvin Kamara that was returned for a touchdown by the Panthers, if people recall that one. There was another fumble in a high leverage situation against Tampa. Like that totally skewed their EPA numbers. But they were actually a good rushing team when you consider Kamara and what Latavius Murray was doing and Mark Ingram, and then obviously with Taysom Hill. It's just those turnovers really hurt them. So, and conversely on defense, they were not creating turnovers. And even though their defensive metrics were pretty good, their EPA wasn't great because they just weren't creating turnovers. And what was happening was their offense was turning the ball over, mainly Jameis Winston, last in EPA because he just was he's going back to old Jameis.
Right.
And the defense was put in a spot where they were having to defend inside their own territory so often, most in the NFL, because Jameis was turning it over or they were fumbling so often that they were, teams were getting the ball inside the 30, right? And so what are you going to do? And so they were actually doing a great job of holding opponents out of the end zone, but they were scoring they're kicking a bunch of field goals. So it made some of their defensive numbers not look as great from a overall, points per drive and points per game and some of those things. So, long-winded, but that's an example of a team that I started backing 2 weeks ago, backed them again last week. Some of those turnovers are regressing. Maybe it's just because Jameis Winston's not there, but I just think that is a perfect example of how to find some undervalued opportunities. And so, I'm doing that as best as I can going forward.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I presume some of the drive level stuff that you're doing captures that as well, right? Because I presume with drives, you're looking at the how they did versus expectation, right? So if you're going to subject your defense to a possession deep in your own territory and you hold them to a field goal, that's probably better than the expectation, right?
Absolutely. And that as well as I really try to isolate specific types of drives. Drives and offenses start in their own territory, right? Like I want to know because that is a majority of the NFL games is teams get the ball in their own territory, whatever it's the 20 or the 30 or the 40, whatever. It's in that territory. And can you successfully string together multiple first downs and get into position to score? Like that's the name of the game. And defensively, it's can you stop that? And like I try to isolate that as much as I can. Obviously, there are turnovers. I can't predict turnovers. Maybe you have some quarterbacks that have a higher propensity to turn it over, like a Jameis, but in general, it's really hard to do that. So I just want to know on a, one-on-one basis, like you get the ball at your own territory and you're going up against a defense that has to defend the length of the field, like who wins out there? And that's, versus expectation is exactly the best way to describe that is, that's the best way to look at it, I think. So those are a couple of things I try to do with the drive stuff for sure.
Awesome. So TA, how do you all put all that analysis into a bet, and then and I presume that doesn't go through power ratings.
Yeah, so I talked about kind of my process. So the first thing I do is I don't necessarily look aheads per se, and so Monday morning I'll literally write down I've been doing this for 20 plus years, so I think I've got a pretty good handle of how the odds should work and how spreads should work. And so I know these teams pretty well. I watch every single game, so I have a pretty good idea of how these teams should be rated. And so I'll jot down what my opinion of the spread should be without any modeling or anything, just in my head. And usually I get, call it 85-90% of the time I'm within a point. So I'm pretty accurate, but then there's, 2 or 3 times in a week, maybe one time where I'm way off by like 2-3 points, and it just doesn't make any sense. And maybe some of that is injury related, but absent that, there are times I'm like, well, that just doesn't make any sense. And so that's where I start, really. Like, why am I way off market here? Is there anything I'm missing? And I'll look at the injury report. I'll look at some other factors. And a lot of time it is that, what happened the prior week? Did a team look really, really bad or really, really good? And that's skewing the opening line. And so that's kind of the first thing I do. And then I'll dig in. And if I'll plug in my numbers. And if it jives with what I'm thinking, I will right away, I'll take that bet. And now I'll consider, do I think that this is going to be pushed a certain way? And typically, other sharp people are thinking about it the same way I am, right? And so it's usually that's the peak of the market, and you want to grab the number, especially if it's near a key number right away. So that's kind of the first thing I do during the week, is see if there's any of those outliers. Maybe there's one a week, right away that fits that criteria. But that's essentially the first thing. And then, gather all my data points, plug in my numbers. If there are any games that I think I have a good sense of where the market's going to move around a key number, I really focus on those first, because obviously you want to grab the best number you can around a key number. But otherwise, I just let the week evolve. I let the news flow come in. I think I do a good job of absorbing as much information that's out there, especially on Twitter. I follow all the beat writers. I get all I dig deep into these injury reports, and it feels like as we've gone along, a lot of injuries are popping up. New injuries are popping up midweek that just you didn't expect, and things like concussions will linger. The teams will hold off. Obviously now with the new rules, they'll hold off on some players longer. So. I let the week evolve a little bit more because there's more information that's out there. And then usually by Friday, I've posted and made most of my wagers at that point. I think, I don't think I've made more than one bet on a Sunday morning in the last 2 years.
Right. Yeah.
I think Saturday afternoon's probably the latest. And that's only Saturday afternoons only when there's the final injury report. If there's something that I was waiting on, I just needed confirmation. Or if there was a surprise, especially with COVID the last 2 years, that's maybe I would fire off a bet or two. But in general, all my wagers are pretty much done for the week by Friday. So that's essentially my evolution of how I go about the week. And it's some of it is purely matchup based. Otherwise, some of the other is just I just think there's overreactions just from where the look aheads were or where these teams were. Evaluated just a couple of weeks prior, so it all depends on those different things. Some of it's pure injury related. I think there's the injuries, there's cluster injuries that are more impactful than maybe the market does. I'm not saying I'm right, but I'll have that conviction. So there's all different factors that go into evaluating the weekly lines. But that's essentially what I do when I go through it during the week.
Awesome. Is there a week 6 bet that you would be willing to share with us?
Yeah, I guess now I was all set to give you this one until I saw the news this morning about Carson Wentz, but I'll give it out anyway.
Yeah, no, just talk about it. That's completely fine.
Yeah, so I like the Commanders tonight. I took them on the money line minus 102. I still think it's a pick 'em right now. And this, again, talking about some of the inefficiencies and digging a little bit deeper, on the surface, the Washington defense, you may look at some of I think they're bottom 5 in points per game allowed, and they don't create any turnovers. But look at their underlying metrics. They're actually pretty good. They are top 10 in success rate. on defense. Like I said, their EPA numbers don't look as good the more middle of the road. It's because they've only caused one turnover all year. That was an interception. They forced one fumble, did not recover it. So, you'd expect that to regress a little bit. But from a play-per-play perspective and a drive-for-drive perspective, when opponents get the ball in their own territory, they are doing they're top 3 in my metric in terms of success rate allowed to opposing offenses. And I talked about how, the Saints are unlucky a little bit on defense. Well, the Commanders are number 1 or tied for the most drives where their opponents started in their side of the field, so inside the 50. So they're already behind the 8 ball going in, and they've done a pretty good job of holding teams to mainly field goals versus touchdowns. So, like I said, some of their EPA numbers may not look as good because of that. They're put in really bad positions because of Carson Wentz in that offense. But from if the Bears get the ball in their own territory, I feel pretty confident that the Commanders are going to get a lot of pressure on their top, their 4th in pressure rate. You get a lot of pressure on Justin Fields. They blitz a lot. They're 9th in blitz rate, and Justin Fields 33rd against the blitz, looking at PFF grade. He's really bad when he's got pressure in his face. So I feel pretty good that the Washington defense will slow down this really bad offense for Chicago. And then it's just a matter of, can Carson Wentz make enough plays down the field? He's actually the one area, he's struggled this year, but he's 5th in the NFL in deep throws from a PFF standpoint. And we saw it last week. He hit 2 big throws to Diami Brown, 2 touchdowns. He's actually done a really nice job on those deep balls. So the fact that he can connect down the field, and hopefully that injury doesn't hold him back, they can make enough plays with their weapons on the outside. And I think that the Washington defense can hold down this bad Chicago offense enough where Washington squeaks out the victory. And, again, talking about trends, again, I'm not a blind trend bettor, but I think this makes a lot of sense. And it's lasted since 2000. I've gone back to 2015. I'm sure it's gone further. But the rookie head coaches like Matt Eberflus are 8-19 against the spread on Thursday nights since 2015, and it's even worse when it's the first half of the season, when it's kind of newer for these coaches. And it makes sense that a coach is not used to this quick turnaround, prepare his team on a Thursday. It's not normal routine. It makes sense that it's difficult for them to do that, and we saw it with Nathaniel Hackett last week, right? And he's not the best example because he's in over his head anyway, but struggled to get, if you're having problems on offense like the Bears are, short week is not the time to really change things up and improve that offensive efficiency. So all that being said, I think the Washington is worth a wager here, as long as Wentz doesn't turn over and as long as he's not really hurt. That's the caveat.
Right. I like that a lot. The Chicago pass offense looks epically bad when I'm looking at it. So, and my numbers kind of agree with you on Washington's defense.
Yeah, and they're actually really good at stopping the run. They held Derrick Henry to 3.6 yards per carry. They actually held the Titans to under 4 yards per play. It's incredible that they lost that game. But they, that they're the best at their best is defending the run, top 5 in the NFL. So that's the only thing the Bears can do is run the football. So when you've got a team that can stop the run, there's not many other avenues for them to exploit. So I just feel like it's a better matchup for Washington.
Excellent. So TA, also we talked a little bit earlier about how you wouldn't react to one game, but what about 4 or 5? We came into this season with a lot of expectations for the Denver Broncos offense, Nathaniel Hackett and Russell Wilson with a crop of talented young receivers. We haven't seen it. So what do you make of Denver's offense?
Yeah, I mean, disappointment to say the least. They had that talented receiving core coming in, and I will say, so I faded Denver in week 1 and won that game, and then they got unlucky at the goal line with those fumbles. We know that, but didn't look great. Obviously, the decision making at the end. I thought that I had Denver. I think it was week 3 against the Raiders. I thought that Russell Wilson looked really good in that game. It was week 4. Sorry, I thought he looked really good. He threw the ball down the field. He had almost 10 yards per play or per pass attempt. I think he completed like 80% of his balls. Like, they moved the ball through the air. And I thought that he was trending up, and then last week happened. And I think I don't know how much of it is just the offense is not equipped for him. If he's not, he's clearly not running the ball and scrambling and doing the out of structure, scramble drills that he did that was so successful in Seattle. And maybe that's the biggest reason is he's just not a pocket quarterback per se. But I thought that, he had started to pick things up, and then, he had that shoulder injury going to last week, and maybe that was an issue. Some of those throws are way off, and he's usually not that far off with some of his throws. So, I think it's a combination of, I don't think the Nathaniel Hackett offense is that creative. I don't think that his shoulder is in a great spot, and he's just turning himself into, he wants to be a pocket quarterback so badly that he's eliminating what made him so dangerous. And so, it's unless he changes that up, and unless they evolve in the way that he can create plays outside the pocket, I think they're going to continue to struggle. It's just not something that looks really good on paper or on our screen. And I'll be honest, I do know some coaches in the league, and I think the Nathaniel Hackett hire was made specifically because they thought that they had a shot at Aaron Rodgers. If you recall, that still Aaron Rodgers still available. Okay. They had not gotten Russell Wilson yet. So I don't want to disparage Nathaniel Hackett, but I'm not even sure if he was even qualified for a head coaching job. And they thought that maybe that would be a way to lure Aaron Rodgers to Denver, and it didn't work. And they got Russell Wilson. I think with new ownership, as long as they don't make the playoffs and doesn't look like they're trending that way, I think he's gone. I think this is a one and done situation. So they'll have to bring in another offensive mind, likely to help Russell maybe break out of his kind of pocket quarterback, being stubborn about that. So, I don't have high hopes for them. I think they have enough playmakers that they can, from time to time, hit on those deep balls and win some games. But, I think from stringing those together on a drive-by-drive basis, they're definitely not there yet.
I am still personally getting over his clock management on Monday Night Football to open the season. Still
incredible, right?
Unbelievable. TA, so I'm here in Ann Arbor, where we talk a lot about Michigan football. You're down there in Ohio. You often tweet about Ohio State. So is this Buckeye defense really better than last year?
Well, that's a low bar, right?
Well,
the Buckeye defense last year was not good. So much so that they took play calling duties away from Kerry Coombs, who was there. He was a longtime guy, was not qualified really to be defensive coordinator, and things got better towards the end of the year, but still they couldn't tackle. They were misdirections, screen passes. I know Michigan did a lot of that against them, really hurt them. Their linebacking core wasn't very good at diagnosing some of those plays. So they've gotten better. Obviously, they've played nobody, so it's really hard to say how good they are. We know how good they are on offense. Like, the weapons are just ridiculous. You have potentially the number one pick in CJ Stroud. You've got Marvin Harrison Jr. You haven't even seen Smith and Jigba this year because of injury. They've got so many 5-star wide receivers. Like, they're going to be able to move it and score on anybody. It's a matter, like you said, of, is this defense better? I think it's better. I don't think it's an elite defense, but I think it's better. They've got some players on the defensive line, some high quality players. So as long as they could just hold the opponents down to manageable levels, I think they'll be fine. And looking, I don't want to look too far ahead, but between Michigan and between potentially Georgia or Alabama, like, those offenses are not elite, scoring offenses. They're not like wide open, explosive offenses that we've seen with some of the teams in the past. So I think they can outscore some of them, and their defense will be good enough to keep some of those games under a certain level for the offense to exceed expectations and win those. So we'll see.
Yeah,
it seems like it's going to be a showdown. I know Michigan's got a tough one this week at Penn State, but
yeah,
it looks like we're going to have another showdown in Columbus at the end of November.
Well, absolutely. If Michigan gets through Penn State, like, there's a real chance they're 11-0 heading down to Columbus, which is kind of a mess for a Big 12 team or a Pac-12 team to make the playoff, right? So last question. CJ Stroud might win the Heisman. I think he's been good, but is it just because his receivers are so good, right? Like, when he gets to the NFL, might we see something similar to like what we've seen for Justin Fields? Like, his receivers were so wide open against Michigan State, and that's partially because Michigan State's defense is just terrible, and it has been for 2 years. But we know those receivers are good, right? Do you have a sense for how that might translate?
Yeah, and it's not like I don't, I haven't been, I don't track his throws, but like what you see is, yeah, the receivers are awesome, the system's great, but some of these throws are just absolute dimes. I will say the one area that he does struggle in is he doesn't run the ball when he's got yards in front of him. He just always wants to throw it, and so that's something he's going to have to learn. Is when the yards are there in front of him, he's going to have to take it. And so he doesn't deal with a lot of pressure. He's got a good offensive line and just so many weapons that teams can't really blitz him. But when he's got time in the pocket, he's deadly and he's so accurate. And he makes some of the kind of the bucket throws are just incredible. So I think from that perspective, he's got enough tools to be a really good NFL quarterback. Is he going to be an elite guy? I don't know, because you just don't know until you get in the league and you see the bullets flying in your face.
That's for sure.
React. But I think from a pure talent and arm talent perspective, he's elite.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I feel like I watched Justin Fields throw plenty of perfect dimes in college, and I just don't know what I'm seeing in the NFL. And I know it's different, and a lot of guys don't.
The thing about Fields, not to interrupt you, sorry.
Oh, no, go for it.
Fields in college, and this is a lot of scouts were dinging him on this. He didn't anticipate very well. He waited until guys were open and then made the throw, and he looked to run a little bit early. So some of those things have translated to the NFL. Like he doesn't anticipate. He waits till the window's open before he throws. I think, CJ Stroud will, with two guys on a receiver, he'll drop the ball into the bucket. He's not afraid to attack guys who are covered. I know a lot of times they are uncovered, but he still does a good job of threading the needle. Whereas Justin Fields was more about like, when I see you open, then I throw it, versus like throwing you open and anticipating. And, his time to throw, he held onto the ball a lot. It was by far the highest rate coming into the draft among the quarterbacks. So he was holding the ball then, and he's doing it now. So I think it's a little bit different from that perspective. And he's a much better athlete than CJ Stroud. So he tried to, uses his legs more, and obviously leans on that more. But I think they're two different prospects, to be honest. I think Dwayne Haskins, I'm pretty good, I think, with evaluating these quarterbacks out of Ohio State. I mean, Dwayne Haskins, rest in peace. When he was at Ohio State, he was totally a product of, I think, great receivers being open in the system. He would really wait on these guys to be open. That was one that I didn't think he would be a great prospect coming in. And, I think with Fields, it's more of people are banking on his tools, his athleticism. He's got great arm strength. He just has to figure out the anticipation and throwing guys open more than just waiting, because you're not going to see those windows open in the NFL, especially with this offensive line and those receivers. But I think Stroud is a cut above him for sure.
Awesome. Well, we'll see how that goes. TA, thank you so much for your time. Please let everyone know where they can find you on Twitter and your site and everything else.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. I appreciate the time. On Twitter, Clevta, Clevta. You can find me there, and the website if you want to check it out. A bunch of free, articles from the preseason and some good information there. And if you're interested in subscribing, there's an area for you to sign up. But cleveanalytics.com is the website, and hopefully, people are enjoying the information I'm posting on there. I do post some stuff on Twitter as well, so it's not all behind a paywall, but I try to make everyone smart, hopefully make people smarter about the NFL. So that's the goal here. So I appreciate the time, Ed.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I appreciate all your work, and I will continue to follow, and thanks again. Thanks again for listening to this episode of the Football Analytics Show. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Just a reminder, you can get my free sports betting newsletter. You can sign up at thepowerrank.com. This podcast is also supported by listeners like you through Patreon. At the $5 per month level, you get my sincere thanks, and you also get a patron-only episode every month. The most recent one was about college football through my adjusted success rates. At the $10 per month level, you get everything at the lower level and also the established The Pass mug when you sign up. I've gotten a ton of compliments about this mug. There is also a third tier if you really want to engage with football analytics. To support this podcast, go to patreon.com/footballanalytics. Patreon is Patreon. Football Analytics is all one word. Also, if you need something else to listen to, I've actually been listening to The Prince. It is an economist podcast series about Xi Jinping, the leader of China. It's actually pretty fascinating, not just because I'm a Chinese American. I'm currently on episode 4 of 8 episodes, and I think his story is fascinating. Once again, my name is Ed Fang, host of the Football Analytics Show. Thank you so much for listening until the very end. I'll talk to you again next week.